And, and Mark, I believe you're taking over the meeting at this point, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So on behalf of CAPS, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's presentation of Chasing Awe with Gavin Hardcastle. You might recognize Gavin from social media, YouTube, Instagram, Flickr, Facebook, all of those, or even from Gavin's own website, fototripper.com. That's F-O-T-O Tripper. So Gavin's a landscape photographer based on Vancouver Island and originally from Yorkshire in England, the home of the Yorkshire pudding. We won't hold that against him. Personally, I came across Gavin through his YouTube channel. I was looking for inspiration and ideas on composition. I could work the camera, but I wanted to work on composition. So long story short, I went to Gavin's website and I bought his trilogy of lessons on composition made easy, and it's definitely helped me a lot. So a while back, Gavin announced that he was publishing a book. So I jumped on the pre-order list for that and waited patiently, Gavin, and then I waited a bit more, and then finally one day the book arrived. Supposed to be autographed, but it looked like somebody's left-footed done something to it. But so the book is our topic tonight, and one lucky participant in this room will win a free copy. It'll be mailed to you in a pizza box direct from Gavin. Yeah. And if you don't win, the good news is there's plenty of time to get this book on your wish list for Santa. And here I've got mine right there. It's a great book, and I guess we'll turn it over to Gavin, and we'll sit back and enjoy the show.
Yes, this absolutely dazzling display of awe and scintillating dialogue. Well, first of all, Mark, and to the whole Camera Club, thank you very much for this invitation. It's my absolute pleasure to be doing this book reading for you. And I just want to assure you before we get into this, that this is definitely not just some thinly veiled attempt for me to try and sell my book to you. It's definitely not that at all. No. So for those who don't have a clue who I am, or have never watched my YouTube channel, or don't really understand the Photo Tripper experience, I just want to apologize in advance, because humor is definitely something that I utilize to get my work seen, and there's quite a lot of that in this book. There's quite a lot of my particular brand of slightly inappropriate humor. So for anyone who's easily offended, I pre-apologize.
Gavin, can you turn your volume up? People are saying they're having trouble hearing you.
Okay, so.
And you're a little softer when you were talking earlier, so you might be a bit more distant from the mic.
Okay, how is that?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I can go louder. How is that?
That's pretty loud to me. I don't know about
yeah.
that.
So maybe if we can get some nodding heads from some of the people that we can see on the video. Does that sound, much better? Okay.
People saying it's good, yeah.
Let me know if it gets too loud as well, so I can always dial that back a little bit.
Sorry for the interruption.
Oh, no, feel free to, if there's any technical issues, just interrupt and, just dive in there. The way that I do these kinds of presentations, I've done all kinds of Camera Club presentations in person in the past, back in the day, when we could all do that kind of thing. And I always preferred a more informal sort of banter dialogue back and forth with the crowd, because it's just more fun for me than just listening to my own voice rabbit on for ages. So, as I mentioned earlier, you may have heard me talking with Gary, for those who were there at the beginning of when we were all logging in. The way that I want to do this is I'm going to basically read a page and display an image from my book. These are just some of my favorite stories in the book. And what I'll do is I'll share my screen so that you are looking at the image that I'm reading the story about. So let me just go like that, and I'll just minimize. I'll minimize you guys there, and I'll just move that.
Are you interested in seeing this?
Okay, so someone's chatting away there in the back. I can hear. Do you want to just mute your microphone a bit there? Whoever that was. And so can everybody see this image?
Yep, we can.
Perfect. Got Judy there. So yeah, so when you're looking at an image, that is the story that I'm going to be reading for the corresponding image. And then once I've finished reading the story, then I'll just say end of story, and then I'll just open it up to questions about that image. Well, to be honest, you can ask me questions about anything you want. It doesn't have to necessarily be about this particular image, but if you've got any technical questions or you want to know about the location, whatever it is, if you want to know what I had for breakfast today, whatever you want to do, it's all good with me. Just keep it somewhat appropriate. Right, so this image, I'll give you this story. This one is called Hot Coals, and this was shot at Mula in the Faroe Islands. So let me give you this story. Standing atop a 100-meter cliff face, like some hero of legend, I was suddenly struck by the desperate need to evacuate my bowels. There was an instant sense of painful urgency. Worse still was the fact that I was a 1-hour hike from my vehicle, and even then, the nearest toilet was a further 10-minute drive to the airport. If you're not familiar with the Faroe Islands, I can tell you that there are no trees or bushes to crouch behind, and there were 0 toilets available on the trail. Even if there were bushes, I'd end up forever banished by the locals for being the hiker who dropped a bush nugget. Even I can't deal with that level of infamy. My options were to attempt an agonizing 1-hour hike back to the grossly overpriced rental car, or simply bespatter my pantaloons and accept the indignity of a long hike sporting besmirched breeches. I chose the agonizingly painful option. I confess I almost lost control several times as tears rolled down my cheeks and sweat covered my forehead in a war of wills with my own body. I can't imagine what the passing hikers thought of this lone photographer, moaning and muttering to himself while shuffling along the trail with the smallest steps possible. I'm glad to report that I won the battle, but it was very close. After an exquisite visit to the airport facilities, my relief was sublime. I did get a few funny looks from the airport staff. Maybe it's unusual to hear such noises of sweet ecstasy coming from a gents' toilet. Rather than go back to the place of my suffering, I decided to head instead to this very famous waterfall in the hopes of witnessing a lovely sunset. Imagine my joy as within 15 minutes of my arrival at Mulafossa, the sky lit up like a fireworks display. The clouds continued to perform pyrotechnics for at least an hour, almost up until midnight. I'd gone from one of the most painful experiences of my life to one of the most joyous in just over an hour. What a roller coaster of a day. It's always good when you can go adventuring and still get to keep your undergarments. End of story. So before I open for questions, I'll give you a few tech notes. So one of the things that I wanted to do with this book is to obviously show people a beautiful image, give them the story of the image, but also let them know a little bit about how I put that image together, whether it's a technique during shooting or a technique during processing, anything of interest that I figure people who are learning might want to know. I've tried to include that underneath every image. So the tech notes for this. I wanted a longer shutter speed for the waterfall than I did for the waves. For the waterfall, I shot a 0.8 second exposure because I just loved how the wind was blowing the column of water around. So the long exposure made the column look thicker than it actually was. And for the waves, I used a 1/3 of a second shutter speed to capture more texture and detail. And I just blended those two different shutter speeds, those two different exposures in Photoshop. So I'm going to open this up to questions now and see if anybody's got any questions about the story or anything regarding that image. So, Gary, do you want me to actually look at the questions now, or do you want to feed those out to me?
There's nothing in the chat, but I just want to make a comment. When you were talking, your cursor was over the arrow on the far right. And when you do that, the title for the next image shows up. So
We
it's
don't.
over the top of your image. So you want to make sure you leave your cursor off the image and up higher in the sides or something.
So like maybe there, just off the left.
Yeah, that's good. And there's no questions yet in chat that I see.
Or is this going to be a tough crowd? Is this going to...
It says, do you bracket or brighten the blacks? But then you answered it. And did you use a third exposure for the sky?
Well, the sky, I think I probably used several exposures, to be quite honest with you. I can't remember exactly how many exposures I used, but so for the sky, I bracketed probably at least 3 exposures just to get all of the highlights and all of the shadows. So typically what I'll do with a shot like this is whatever it is that's dynamic in the scene, like a constantly changing element, such as the clouds, I'll just keep shooting like a lunatic, constantly shooting, and I'll try and bracket each frame, especially when it's like that, where you've got extremely bright highlights and then these dark shadow areas. And then once I feel like I've got those shots, then I'll take a couple of other shots, a couple of other exposures, which really are the ones I'm talking about in the book, for things like the waterfall and things like the waves, because I feel like you've got a little bit more time to capture those. Whereas when you've got a sky that's changing that quickly, you don't have the luxury of time. So you just got to shoot real fast and get those bracketed exposures when you can, because once the light shows over, it's over and you've missed your chance. So hopefully that answers that question. Any other questions regarding this image?
There's one here. Did you just luck out getting that light, or did you go multiple times over and over? I was there once and the wind was so high it was almost impossible to get a shot. That's from Chris offers that comment.
Yeah, it's going to annoy you, but that was only the second time. I went there maybe 3 or 4 days before, and the light was just flat. The wind wasn't enough for the waves to be interesting. And one of the things I love about the high wind is how it blows that waterfall around. I've seen images where that waterfall it's basically upside down. It's blowing up. It's anti-gravity waterfall, and I love those shots. So I didn't get the wind that you sometimes see, which is fantastic, but I did get the light, and that light, there was me and maybe 4 other photographers, and we were just whooping, we were just, whoa, look at this. I don't often get light that good, and that's why this image has ended up in the book. So it wasn't my first time, but yeah, I got very, very lucky. And the guy who I was traveling with, he decided to go a different direction. And when I sent him a picture of what I was looking at, he was, put it this way, he had a few curse words in his response, because where he wasn't getting that kind of light.
Anne asks, did you use any focus stacking? And Judy asks, what time of year was this?
This was in the summer. So this was July. And basically, if you go to the Faroe Islands in July, it never really gets dark. And the sunset is around about midnight. And the light, if you do get, good light, it like I said in the story, it lasts an hour or more. It can go on for a long time for both sunrise and sunset. So summer is a really good time to be there if you want long light, but you're not necessarily going to get huge water volume in the waterfall there. And then what was the other question?
The focus stacking question.
Yeah, so I did focus stack it, but in that image that you're looking at there, I didn't need to. I just did it out of habit, just in case. But when I finally got back home and I checked the raw files and I started to put the image together, it just didn't need it. Everything was in sharp focus, because that rock that you can see just off center to the right there in the foreground, that was probably about 10 feet away. So I don't think I needed to actually focus stack for that shot. And the original shot is actually much wider. So the rocks that were in my immediate foreground ended up getting cropped out because the shot was just a little bit too wide. And I wanted to fill the frame a little bit more with the color. And so that's why I cropped it a little bit. Any more questions on that one?
I think that's it. Oh,
Okay.
what lens did you use?
That would have been, I believe that would have been an 18 millimeter prime on the Sony full frame A7R2. I think that was. It was an A7R2. So I'm going to guess 18 millimeters if memory serves me right there. Okay, so
You can go on.
so the next story, I guess I'll just move this over here. Click onto the next one. Oh, there we go. And then if I put my mouse maybe there, that'll do. So, maybe I'll just put it down there, slightly out of the way. Oh, wherever you go, it's going to, let me just go full screen. No, that was full screen. Okay. Well, it looks like we're going to get that little highlight wherever we go. That's better. Right. So this is also an image that I want you guys to pay attention to, because I'm going to give away a free copy of my book, Chasing Awe with Gavin Hardcastle. But I'm going to give it away to the very first person who can post something in the chat window to explain to me what's wrong with this image. There's something not quite right with this image. So have a good look at it. You don't need to just, fire off the first thing that comes into your head. But the first person who does get it right is going to be the winner. I believe that's how we decided we were going to figure this out. And while I'm reading the story to you, see if you can figure out
Just
what
before
is.
you go far, we've had a whole bunch of answers already. Train looks fake. Back of the train instead of the front. Locomotive is backwards. Blue train car. Wrong contour. Train is going the wrong direction. The train is on a slant.
No,
Engine is backwards.
all of those things are correct.
Locomotive is tilted. Train going west, not east to Hind, and there are 2 tracks, but only see one.
No. Well, you guys have a think about it, and I'm gonna read you the story, right? And hopefully, by the time I come out of this story, you've nailed it, which I think you will do.
Inconsistent shadows is the one of the different ones.
Oh, whoever said that, let's have a little bit more clarity on that. A little bit more certain about that answer. What exactly do you mean by that?
So that's up to you, Clayton. What's your comment?
The train doesn't have the same shadows that the trees are casting, so it seems like it was taken at 2 different times a day or something.
Yeah, he's got it. Clayton, you got it. Was Clayton the first one to figure that out?
The first one that made the comment about
Right. You just won yourself a copy of Chasing Awe with Gavin Hardcastle.
Awesome.
Okay, so basically, I'll explain to you before I read the story how I did that. So I went there the day before, which you'll find out in the story, and I composed the exact same shot. And the light was very, very similar, but not quite as bright. I went there the next day, and then I got this beautiful light. And I actually spent a lot of time setting up the composition, looking at the image that I'd shot the day before, and getting everything to line up absolutely perfectly. And it was, because when I actually blended those 2 exposures together from day 1 to day 2, they were absolutely flawless, except for the shadow, because the first day the light was a bit softer. It didn't cast that same hard shadow. And I loved the final image. I really loved it. And I wanted to put it in my book. And I thought, but it doesn't have that shadow and people are going to notice. But then I thought, well, wouldn't that be a really cool thing to just put in the book and kind of give it to people as a puzzle to see if they could solve it? And it actually says in the book, if you can figure out what the problem is, then I'll send somebody a free copy of my chapter 1, Finding the Shot, from my Composition Made Easy course. So it's kind of like a little puzzle. So that's why I left it in the book, because I loved the image and I knew that there was something not quite right with it. But anyway, you figured that one out, Clayton. Right, so let me give you the story. So this one's called The Waiting Game, And this is at Morant's Curve in Alberta, which you guys will probably know very well. For 2 mornings, I waited at Morant's Curve in sub-zero temperatures to get this shot. In all honesty, I'd never really had much interest in shooting this place. I'd driven past it a bunch of times and thought, it's a cliche, which it is, you know. But after heavy snow in January of 2018, I just couldn't resist. The conditions were perfect, and this winter wonderland was just begging to be photographed. Getting a good shot of Morant's Curve with the train snaking through the valley is more complicated than you might think. First of all, you've got to get the timing of the train right. The train actually goes up and down the Bow Valley a few times each day, but you never know which direction it'll be going or what time it'll show up. The next challenge is even more tricky, getting beautiful light. Combining both the train's timing and the possibility of epic light takes some level of dedication and could result in frostbite for the unprepared. Luckily, I had my thermos full of hot coffee, lots of chocolate, some fat woolly socks with a double layer, and of course, a couple of veggie samosas. Oh, I love samosas. There's usually at least one other photographer standing around waiting for the train. It's customary to strike up a conversation and play the "can you hear a train" game. You'd be surprised at how many things sound like a train in that valley. The dead giveaway is the trademark squeal. It's actually a pretty slow-moving train, so a shutter speed of around 1/250th of a second should do the trick. I had quite a lot of light this morning, so I had the luxury of stopping down to f10, which gave me plenty of depth of field and sharpness. Now, if you plan on shooting your own train landscape, I would recommend starting with the camera settings shown below, which I'll just explain to you in a second. If it's a dim day with not much light, you might want to open your aperture. And if you need to get even more light performance, you could increase your ISO. You'll also want to pre-focus manually on the train tracks right where you predict the train will be. If the train is moving perfectly, pretty quickly, you'll want to pick a faster shutter speed of about an 800th of a second. Shooting in continuous burst mode will allow you to pick the best frame and end up with a winner. So that's the end of the story, and I'll give you the settings there. So that was 250th of a second at ISO 320. So if it had been a bit darker, I would have pushed the ISO up to about 800, maybe even slightly more. So the tech notes, there's no point in giving you those because I just gave you those in that pre-explanation there. So any questions on that image that I haven't already answered?
No new questions. We did have several other people after Clayton bring up the shadows, so good for them. But there's no questions related to this image yet.
Yeah, or even personal questions, whatever you want to dive into. It's all acceptable. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll move on to the next image. So let's push over to this one. Okay, so let me find a page for that. So this one's called Spinning Blue Marble. And this was shot in the White Mountains of California. I remember how it felt the first time I captured a proper Milky Way photograph with my digital camera. Even though I knew exactly what it would look like from the gajillions of Milky Way photos posted online, there's nothing quite like doing it for yourself. This sparked a pretty all-consuming obsession with night photography that took years to settle into something manageable. These days, I've got it totally under control. I'd even say I'd got it out of my system, as I only shoot nightscapes a few times of the year. But every now and then, when the conditions are just right, I'll feel that tingle of excitement at the idea of once again shooting under the stars. Watching the galactic core dance above our spinning blue marble at such a shocking speed is something that all human beings should experience. We stare up at the same cosmic landscape that the first sighted creatures on planet Earth enjoyed millions of years ago. Without this experience, how can we truly know where we are and what we are? We are the luckiest life forms this side of the Orion Arm. I think that if more humans realize this, we'd perhaps make more of our good fortune and spend less time and energy creating an awful mess of our wonderful playground. This ancient bristlecone pine tree in the White Mountains of California is likely thousands of years old. It was probably growing under the same stars while Caesar began building the Roman Empire. Will it still be growing through the rise and fall of the next great empire? Will humanity still be around to share the view of the stars with this when this tree reaches maturity? I really hope so. End of story. So I'll give you some tech notes on this one. So to create this image, I shot a 3-hour time lapse. I set the camera on the tripod and began the time lapse in interval mode, and then came back hours later after shooting hundreds of frames, each at 30 seconds. Once completed, I then shot 2 more 30-second exposures while light painting the tree from the side. I blended the hundreds of time-lapse frames in a program called StarStax, and then brought that into Photoshop. And the final stage was to mask in the 2 light-painted exposures so that the tree wasn't just a dark silhouette. It took a lot of work, but I'm delighted with the final result. So any questions on spinning blue marble?
The one question you've already answered was wondering if it was a bristlecone pine. Someone's asking about the presentation in terms of what we see at the bottom is the name of the coming slide. We don't see the name of the slide you're talking about. And they're wondering if there's some way to display that. And I don't know the answer to that, and nobody else has said so in the chat.
Right. It's at the top of the screen, Gary, the very top, you can see spinning blue marble.
Okay, so you're saying right up.
Yeah, the very top of the browser window. But I also tell you the name of the image as I'm reading the story. So I'll always give you the name of the image.
Right there, people need to watch there.
There you go.
A couple other questions here. The starred stars, what did you do to get them?
I think, and this is a real spoiler for you, I think I might have pasted in a sun star from a different image and blended it in Photoshop. So I think I actually cheated on those. However, what I can tell you is there is one lens that I've used on the Sony camera system, and it's a Zeiss Loxia 21mm, and it will actually give you a star like that on the brightest. I think Jupiter is the brightest, if memory serves me right, when you do these Milky Way images. And on that lens, you can actually get a little, kind of like a little sun star where Jupiter is. It's that good for astrophotography. But because it's a 21mm, it's not very wide. So it's a challenge to get these kinds of shots. It's not super wide, but it does actually give you that effect for real. But if memory serves me right, I think I pasted those in. So very naughty of me there. But I always admit when I do things like that.
Yeah, well, that segues to the next question. Just curious, how much time in Photoshop did you spend?
That one, not a great deal, because I used the software called StarStax, which basically what it does, it gets all 300, let's say you've got 300 exposures, and it compiles them and blends them all together automatically. So you don't have to go into Photoshop and, combine all of these together all at the same, with all with like a 2 or 5 second process, which would take you forever. StarStax will just blend it together. So StarStax will create this star trails image because it'll just blend all of those 300 exposures together, and it'll output one master file. And then the only time consuming bit with that, because you can just leave that running and come back to it when it's done. When you've outputted the final file through StarStax, Then you bring it into Photoshop and you add those extra exposures with all of the light painting. And that's probably the most amount of time you'll spend. And maybe I spent 10, 20 minutes doing that. It's years ago, so I can't tell you exactly how long, but it wasn't a difficult or time-consuming image to put together. I've spent way more time on some images that you would look at and think, oh, he's hardly done anything with that. And then other images that look like they've had a lot of work done didn't really take that long. So it's a strange thing with processing.
Okay. The next one is, did you need to align the stars in any particular way in your composition of the shot to get the star trails in the direction you wanted?
Well, the stars always go in the same direction. So, but yeah, I mean, it does depend on which way you point your camera as to what type of star trails you're going to get. So if you point north, you'll get a much more looping movement in the stars. But this was actually facing towards the galactic core, which at this time of year was south, almost southwest. So I knew I specifically wanted to set this shot up so that the galactic core would pass behind the tree. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because I also wanted to get the actual time-lapse video clip out of this. So one of the things that's really good about doing a time-lapse for astrophotography is that not only can you create a really beautiful image like this where you've got a star trail, but you can also then get each single shot that you took as a frame of video to use in a video, which, as you know, I do. So I do have this beautiful video clip of the Milky Way passing behind that tree, and it just looks fantastic. So when you shoot like this, you get two goals. You get your time lapse for your video, but you also get your star trails image. So it's like a two result shoot.
2 for 1. Okay, that's it for the questions so far.
Okay, so now let's move on to the next image. So click on this. This one's called Disembodied. So let me find that in the book. That's page 92. So this is a bit of a little bit of a sad story. It kind of starts out sad and it's a bit of a feel good at the end. It's quite an intimate look into my life and who I am. So this is called Disembodied. And this was shot at Fairy Lake in BC, here on Vancouver Island. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of this before. So here's the story. Look at that little fairy tree. Cold, almost submerged, barely hanging on. That's me. I never truly acknowledged it at the time, perhaps because I'm English, or perhaps because denial seemed the safest way to handle such a dark chapter of my life. But make no mistake, I was utterly and hopelessly depressed. I hadn't used my camera in 6 months and had zero interest in adventuring in the rain. My business was struggling, I was emotionally broken, and I'd entirely lost my mojo. Up until this point, I never really understood what it meant to be depressed. While my melancholia was purely situational and directly related to my circumstances, it gave me a newfound empathy for those who suffer from clinical depression and other forms of mental illness. I'd gone through tough patches in my life many times before, and deep inside I knew that this was a phase that I would eventually overcome. But for some people, the process of recovery is less assured and perhaps takes longer. My recovery got a jump start with the arrival of the ever-energetic Brent Henderson during a last-minute visit in the darkest days of January. From the moment I picked him up at the airport, his unbearable optimism made it very clear that moping was not an option. It took all that I had to let him drag my sorry ass all over Vancouver Island in the gloomiest depths of winter. He wanted to visit every single spot that I'd already shot to death 1,000,000 times before. Painful. For 5 days, we toured the island during torrential downpours and eventually ended up here at Fairy Lake. With nothing better to do, I begrudgingly took this shot just to shut Brent up. When I looked at the back of the camera to check the image, something amazing happened. Deep, deep down in the darkest halls of my soul, a sleeping mojo opened its eyes. It wasn't quite able to get out of bed, but it was finally awake. It's silly, but I would never have asked for help. Real friends, they know when you need it, even if you don't. End of story. And I'll give you some tech notes here. So, an often overlooked part of the creative process in digital photography is the white balance setting. And I'm guilty of this myself because I trust the auto white balance setting on my camera to get it right in most situations. Maybe it's just because of how I was feeling, or perhaps it merely looked better. But for this image, I deliberately experimented with the white balance setting on my camera to create a cooler, more moody tone. I think that simple technical alteration had something to do with that tiny spark that rekindled my dormant creativity. So have we got any questions on that one?
No questions, but a couple of comments. Love the simplicity of this image. Carol Ann says she's even taken photos of this and she loved this place. It was mystical. And Judy says, wonderful story.
Oh, thanks, guys. That's very nice of you to say. Yeah, it's it's one of those places that's it's been so overshot, but depending on when you go there, you can get some conditions that are just, even if you think, no, I don't want to stop and take this shot, you just have to. You got to pull over and got to take that shot. I've seen it looking terrible. I've seen it looking absolutely fantastic. And I think out of all of the times I've been there, the ones that have been the most photogenic have been winter, because you get a higher water level, you can get calm lake reflections, and often you can get frost and that lovely steam that sometimes rises off the surface of the lake. So winter is always my favorite time to go there. And I'll be honest, I'll probably go back this winter and shoot something very similar. So if there's no more questions on that.
Yeah, David says, he makes a statement, but it's framed as a question. Don't you think you make your best photographs when you're emotionally at a high or a low point?
Yeah, I think as artists, if you look at musicians, heartbreak and loss and, sorrow, yeah, they can sometimes, I mean, you can be wallowing for months and not produce anything. But there comes a point often when you face these challenging moments in life where something happens and all of a sudden you just create something beautiful that often reflects what's going on inside. And conversely, like you said, you can be absolutely ecstatic with life, and the same thing, you produce work of a certain tone, which might reflect what's going on inside. So yeah, there's some truth to that for sure.
And Janet asks, James asked, do you recall what white balance setting you used?
Oh, well, I think I started off with, it might have actually been incandescent, because it was, I think I was using what I usually use for astrophotography. So on the Sony system, I actually use incandescent for night images. And I think for whatever reason, I just thought, I'll just try that. And it was just this instant blue tone. I mean, it was close to blue hour anyway. So everything it did have that kind of blue hue to it. But this just took it to the next level, and it just became so blue and moody. And it was just like, oh, when you see something on the back of your camera and you're just like, yeah, that's it. That's right. And as a musician, I often make these comparisons to playing music and creating music. It's just sometimes when you play music, you'll hit a certain chord, or you'll create a certain melody or a harmony or a groove, and you'll just know, you'll have this gut feeling of, oh yeah, that's right. And so that was what this was. And it's a very simple thing. It's just the smallest little adjustment, but it can make such a change to how you feel about the composition, that you go from being like, whatever, to, oh, I'm really excited about this now. And it'll also give you an idea of what you're going to do when you get the image back home and you want to process the image, sometimes these little creative changes that you make in the field will dictate what you're going to do when you process. And I often think about that at the time that I'm shooting. I often think, oh, this is what I'm going to do. When I get this back home, I'm going to make that bit a bit hotter, make that bit a bit cooler. And there's all kinds of things that go through my head at the time that I'm taking the shot that I know I'll be doing when I get it back home.
And Janet makes a comment, I thought it would be Adam Gibbs dragging you in the rain, not your friend Brent.
This was before Adam and I were hanging out together. I think I'd met Adam just a few months before this, but we weren't hanging out or going on shoots or really doing much together. In fact, this might have even been, I think this was before me and Adam even did a single vlog together. And I think anyone who watches my channel or knows what I'm about, if you go right back to the beginning of when I first started making videos, Brent is the original sidekick. Brent was there in the very first vlog that I ever did. And, he's been there for so many adventures. So I love Adam and we have some adventures together, and he is totally my sidekick, but I guess I have a few, but Brent was the original, and he still joins me whenever he can, but he's got a day job, so I only get him some of the time.
Okay, that's it for this one.
Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, and there he is. It's Talk of the Devil. That is Brent right there. This is one of my favorite shots of all time. And in fact, talking of Adam, this is actually Adam's favorite shot too, from the book. So Adam actually wrote the foreword in my book, and this is the image that he refers to. But anyway, I'll give you the story for this image here. So this one is called The Light in the Dark, and this was shot in the East Kootenays in BC. I'll give you the story. There are places on this earth that look like they were plucked straight out of a children's fairy tale story. This ice cave in the East Kootenays of British Columbia is one of those magical places. Now, reaching this cave involved a 2-hour snowshoe hike through deep snow while carefully avoiding the treacherous snow shelf around the canyon's edge. This was my second visit to the cave during the depths of that long winter. I decided to bring Brent along for the journey. To say that he was blown away would be an understatement. Hiking in such cold conditions can be challenging due to my considerable girth. I tend to sweat profusely during exertion, and I quickly had to peel off my many layers. Upon arrival at the cave, there was a short cooling down period followed instantly by my extremities' rapid freezing. It's essential to prepare for this by reapplying warm layers, consuming hot coffee from a flask, and then chasing that down with some trail lube. If you don't know what trail lube is, it's basically booze. Brent's choice of trail lube is often very questionable brandy of the off-brand variety, not unlike Paint Stripper. After about an hour of creating test shots, I decided I wanted that human element in my image to provide more of a story and some much needed scale. Brent's bright orange jacket provided that pleasing warmth amidst so much coldness. I had to shoot a long exposure while Brent carefully exhaled so that his breath caught the light of his headlamp. The entire scene reminded me of the sci-fi movie The Thing from 1982, which has always been one of my favorite films. After a brilliant shoot, we hiked back down out of the canyon. And all I could think about was the other half of my Subway sandwich patiently waiting for me in the car. And you can imagine my crushing disappointment when finally we arrived at the car, starving and exhausted, only to discover a rock-hard frozen sub covered in ice crystals. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I ate it anyway. End of story. So let me give you some tech notes. So To get that lovely beam of light, I had to shout, "Go!" to Brent when I triggered the shutter. He then carefully exhaled a full breath during the 6-second exposure while keeping very still. And while he was doing that, I lit the cave interior with my headlamp from the lower right of the cave to balance out the two light sources. I then shot a 30-second exposure while Brent moved his headlamp around the entire cave. And using layer masks and the lighten blend mode in Photoshop's layers panel, I blended these exposures to create this final image. And the end result really gives you a sense of what it felt like to be there, minus the stench of guano, of course. So any questions about the light in the dark?
No, just a couple of comments. Janet says he's in Superman's cave. And I love this sci-fi effect.
Yeah, I'm definitely influenced by 80s and 70s sci-fi movies, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, all that Spielberg stuff. I just love the cinematography and all that kind of stuff. And that's what probably subconsciously, inspired me to become a landscape photographer, is all of the movies that I watched as a kid in the 70s and the 80s. Okay,
so Chris asks, ever use strobes to light things like this, or would that be too much light?
No, there's one reason why I don't use strobes, and maybe things have changed since I last looked at it, but it's the gear. It's having more and more gear. I don't want to carry more equipment. So what I try and do, especially with these types of shoots where it's quite the long hike, it's quite treacherous conditions, I try to keep my pack as small as I can. And for things like this, just use the light sources that I already have, which in this case is my headlamp and Brent's headlamp. I don't really want to carry extra equipment, although I'm sure these days you could probably get some fairly effective strobes that are tiny. I really don't know, but it's all about keeping things minimal for me.
And Barry asked, what focal length did you use?
Man, you're asking me another. This was years ago. It's quite wide. I would guess, again, it's probably that same 18mm Zeiss Batiste lens on the Sony system. And not only is 18mm a fairly wide, it's quite wide. It's not super wide. 16 is quite a bit wider. But 18 is pretty good. But that lens in particular is really good for this type of photography. And again, if you look at the kind of like, it's almost like a sun star that's coming out of Brent's light, that is the real deal. That's not been photoshopped in like those star trails images that you saw earlier. That's actually what that lens can produce. And I think, what was the aperture? I'll read out the settings. Oh yeah, here it was. So it was the 18mm. I should have just looked at my book. The information's right there. 18mm, and I shot that at f8. So even at f8, that particular lens can produce a really pleasing star from a light source. And obviously, if you stop down to f11 or f16 or f22, it'll become even more pleasing, but then it just gets a little bit too dark, especially in a situation like this. So f8 was about the narrowest aperture I could get away with it being pitch dark. It's completely dark in there.
Anne says, love your comment about the Subway sandwich. I learned the hard way that a frozen egg salad turns into a popsicle when hiking in winter. And Chris asks, do you worry about the temperature of the lights coming from different lights, assuming you didn't have the same lights, or was that not much of a concern?
No, I mean, as long as you don't have a red light. So this is the thing. Over the years, I've taught quite a lot of astrophotography workshops where we do light painting. And then the first thing that I tell people is there's no red light allowed. Because even though the red light's it's kind of good for your vision and it's less polluting, if somebody is taking a long exposure during your red light being on, it'll just destroy their shot. So as long as you both have, Brent's light might have had a slightly more green tone to my light, they wouldn't have had matching tones. That's not really a problem. When you're processing your images like this in Photoshop, you've got so much control over those little nuances, those little differences. But because they're fairly close, it's close enough and I don't worry about it. But if one of them had been like a very pronounced color, like a green or a red light, that would have been a problem. And you can see that as soon as you've taken the shot on the back of the camera, you can look at it and think, whoa, who left their red light on? You know, and you just fix it and reshoot. So I would definitely not worry too much about that kind of thing, but do worry about extreme differences because those are much harder to fix.
I'm wondering about the cave itself. Is the cave access well marked so that others who head up there could find it?
No, it's quite hard to find. And when it snows, even if someone blazed the trail 4 days before, if there's heavy snow, you will not find that trail. In fact, I went back there a few years later, which you can actually watch on my YouTube channel. I went there with Thomas Heaton, Adam Gibbs, and Nick Page, and Brent. I think Brent was there. Or maybe Brent didn't make it that day. But the four of us went in there a few years after I shot this image, and we could not find the trail. It took us quite a long time to find the trail. And really, the only way that you can find it is you're going to have to get some insider information. But once you're there, you kind of have to snowshoe a little bit and post hole a little bit. But eventually, if you can find where there's the breaks in the trees, then you'll find the trail eventually. But it's really difficult and quite dangerous because there are parts on the trail where you're basically on an overhang, or you're coming to the very edge of an overhang. So where the snow creates a shelf that can just collapse. And if you get too close to that, it's really dangerous. So your option is to just stay away from the edge, but then of course that's going to make the hike a lot more difficult, and you're going to have to, bash through that snow a little bit more. But it's not somewhere that I would officially recommend that anyone goes. I've done some pretty stupid things, and on that day that we went there the last time, it was quite sketchy. And then you have to go, once you get down to the river, you have to hike down a river to get into this cave. And of course, the river is frozen. So you're hiking on ice. You're guaranteed to put your foot through the ice and get covered in freezing cold water and snow. I don't mind that kind of stuff because I've done so much of it, but it's a bit of a turn off for a lot of people. So I can't recommend it. I honestly can't.
So 2 comments and then we'll go to the next image. One is amazing shot, and the other is I see the face of a husky just to the right of the individual in this picture. Anyone else see it? It's almost even in height with his head. So
a husky. Maybe in the roof, maybe in the ceiling there, I could see a bear.
Right there, I think is what she's saying.
Oh, yeah, it really is. That's a husky. It's quite a cute husky as well. Yeah.
Frozen from some previous visits.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Oh, well spotted. I didn't see that. See, this is what I love about photography is even the creator of the image can completely miss something that somebody else sees. And having taught workshops for years, my favorite thing about teaching workshops is where you've got 8 or 10 people all lined up in the same area, and you're all kind of looking at the same thing, but everyone's got a different shot. Everyone sees it in a different way. And I have the pleasure of kind of doing the stroll from one camera to the next, just to see if people need help with their shot. And I get to look at every composition that people have shot and framed up, and they're always so completely different. That's my favorite thing about teaching workshops, which sadly I've not been able to do for 18 months. So any more questions?
Well, just one. Janina offers that might be a usable subject for your next test question.
Yeah, the husky. Yeah, that's a good one actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Any more questions?
No.
Right. Okay. So we'll move on to the next one, which is, let's have a look here. Oh, by the way, are we going to stop for a quick break if anyone wants a bathroom break, or are we just going to blast right through?
I'd leave Mark to answer that question. I'm not sure what their tendency is.
Right. Well, usually there's usually kind of like a break halfway through because I might need to top up my drinking water here.
Okay,
Otherwise, I might run dry. So we could do that after this next image.
you decide, yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll do that. Just a quick break. Right. Okay. So next image. So this one is called Lunacy. This was shot on the Isle of Skye in Scotland, and it's a place called the Fairy Pools. And I don't really know why they call it the Fairy Pools. I guess there are some pools that you can sit in, but really it's just a series of waterfalls down this river. But it's an absolutely spectacular place, very typical of the Highlands. So let me give you this story. It's called Lunacy, and it's the Isle of Skye. Half of being a productive landscape photographer is making the right choices regarding weather and location. I often see photographers complain about failed shoots due to bad weather, and while I've done more than my fair share of that, there are ways to avoid such disappointment. I guess the disappointment stems from a mismatch between our expectations and our reality. My favorite way to ensure success is to visit locations that look beautiful even during awful weather. Learning how to compose images in a way that harnesses the beauty of bad weather is very liberating. It just depends on your definition of bad weather. Now, I've never enjoyed sideways rain more since I became a passionate landscape photographer. In fact, the only people that you usually see out in all kinds of weather are either lunatic marathon runners or landscape photographers. I can't decide who is the craziest. For this image, I performed my customary ritual of wading knee-deep into the river. I'm a firm believer that if you really want to capture a scene authentically, you have to feel it, assuming it's safe to do so, of course. I'd never wade into a river of magma, obviously. Once my feet had become suitably numb from the cold water, my next step was to go handheld with the camera to find my composition with the minimum of faff. After almost dropping the camera several times, I finally framed up this pleasing composition and locked things down with the tripod. A few other photographers were hanging around by the side of the river, telling me I was crazy. After capturing the shot, I casually showed them the back of the camera on my way out, and within minutes, they had all waded into the middle of the river to frame up their shots. Who's crazy now, eh? End of story. So let me give you some tech notes on this. For the water in the immediate foreground, I used a faster shutter speed of about 1/3 of a second to capture more texture and detail. For the water in the main waterfall, I used a slower half-second exposure. And blending the two exposures in Photoshop is very easy when using layer masks and takes just a few seconds. So have we got any questions for that before I have to let my cat back in?
No, not yet.
Okay, no questions. Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll go and refill my water and see you in 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll just mute my microphone. Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay, you can hear me. Can you guys see me? Are you actually seeing me, or are you only seeing the screen share?
I run dual screen so I can see both the image on the full screen and your beautiful face in the other one.
Oh yeah. Can you see Leo in the background? That's my cat Leo. And he was fine and happy and nice and comfortable until I opened the door to let my other cat Sterling in, and now he's all jealous. You could if you could see it, you could see it in his face. The jealousy it's a real thing. But he loves him, but he's really jealous. Right. So
Okay,
is anybody else having a little bathroom break, or should I wait, or should I carry on?
Well, there's a couple comments or questions here.
Okay.
Someone's asking if you were there on the same day that we were definitely crazier for visiting this location, is the comment. And then wondering where you'd like to shoot that you haven't been, what's on your bucket list? I'll just throw these out while we're waiting for people. I like you now that I know you have a cat.
Oh, but not until then.
Yeah. Did you intentionally leave that drop of water in the middle right third of the image? The fact that it was raining?
Okay, so I have to confess, I'm quite embarrassed about this. So this image obviously is in the book. And the whole time that I'd had this image posted on the internet, which has been years, I never noticed that water spot. I never even spotted it, didn't even see it until I submitted the image to the print company, and they sent me the book for proofing. And then I saw it. It's strange how you can look at something for hours. You can be editing an image for hours. You post it on the internet, you look at it, and you just miss really obvious things. And it took me years before I even noticed it. And whoever that posted that comment has seen it immediately. So probably the first thing you saw is, oh, there's that water spot. But I didn't notice it until I saw it in print. And I think that's quite an interesting fact about looking at your work in print, is you look at it in a different way. I think when you're working on a computer screen and you're editing your images, you're kind of looking at your attention is devoted to things like, oh, is it too sharp? Or have I fixed the highlights and the shadows? And have those two exposures that I blended lined up? Even though this is a technical issue, this water spot, you're so focused on other elements that you just miss the obvious. And it's not, for me anyway, it's often one of the reasons why I like to print my images. It's not until I look at it on a piece of paper or in a book, or it could even be a massive wall print, all of a sudden I'll see something that I just completely missed. Anyway, luckily I did spot that in the proofing stage, and I did correct it. So in the book, it doesn't have that water droplet. I haven't gone back and re-edited or re-uploaded this image. This is still an image from years ago. But I feel like it would have worked if that water spot had a bit more depth to it, if it wasn't just a blur. I think if you could have seen some kind of edge to the water spot, but realistically, that doesn't usually work. I've tried it many times. It just looks like a fuzzy spot. You can't see the edge or the crisp edge or any kind of reflection in it. But yeah, it would look really good if it was intentional, but sorry, I just messed up.
Okay, that's it for this image. Oh,
Okay.
Sorry, hold on. How did you perfectly line up the two photos of Morant's curve taken on the 2 different days?
It really was quite easy, because what I had to do, I had the same memory card from the day before, obviously. And what I could do is I could zoom in to the playback image and just check exactly how things lined up on the original image. And then with the second attempt the day after, you can also zoom in on your live view on that camera and almost see it in the exact same way. So I had to make lots of micro adjustments. And I also memorized exactly where I'd put my tripod legs. I mean, there's always going to be some difference, but I managed to get it pretty accurate. And then in Photoshop, you can use the auto align tool, which will automatically align things. And then you can make little minor adjustments, like you can actually warp and twist and stretch things. But I didn't need to do any of that. It just lined up. And then I just had to mask out everything but the train. And the tricky part was masking out the trees that kind of cut the snake of the train halfway through. You could see how the trees bisect it. So that was just a little bit of a time-consuming mask job. But yeah, it just lined up because I composed it. One thing you can do if you're going to do something like that, here's a tip for you. And I think you should do this anyway, even if you're not doing this type of technique. Whenever you're composing an image, always pay attention to the edges of the frame, because this is where problems will creep in. This is where things that you wished you'd spotted will creep in, usually towards the edges. So when I did that alignment job visually during the shoot, I was really paying attention to the corners of the frame and where it ended, right down to like, okay, that little branch in the bottom right was a bit shorter in yesterday's image, so I'll just have to nudge it over, just making all these little micro adjustments. So all of that time that I spent in the field making those micro adjustments to get the composition exactly the same saved me time in Photoshop that I otherwise would have had to stretch things, and I just didn't need to do it. It just worked out great. So any more questions?
No more questions. Just
Okay,
a
so
comment that now they can't unsee the water spot.
yeah, well, buy the book and you won't see it. There you go. That's about as subtle as it gets. Right, next image. Oh, yes. Mystic Milky Way. That is my beloved Amanda, if you don't already know that. So let me find this in the book. This is page 66. Right, Mystic Milky Way. So this was shot at Mystic Beach here on Vancouver Island a couple of summers ago. There's nothing more satisfying than realizing an idea. The idea came for this shot several years ago when I first visited the sea cave on the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. Upon entering the cave, my first thought was, I bet the Milky Way passes through that opening in the summer. I knew I wanted to capture that shot, but wouldn't it be so much cooler if I could place a stargazer in the frame? I filed it away in memory, and years later, I got the opportunity to turn the idea into reality with Amanda. When we ventured into the sea cave at Mystic Beach with this shot in mind, I wasn't entirely sure that the stars would align. The chances of getting clear skies on the last day of September with zero wind, well, we got very lucky. We arrived just before sunset so that I had plenty of time to play around with the different camera positions while it was still light. While we enjoyed a lovely late summer sunset, I found the ideal composition. And all we had to do next was get cozy and wait for the stars to come out and play. Just 2 hours after the sunset, the Milky Way was blazing overhead, so we quickly got to work and made the most of this short window of opportunity. I put this image together using several exposures that were shot over about 30 minutes, and obviously had to focus stack my model, Amanda. I then blended that exposure with the background. As soon as I saw those first exposures on the back of the camera, I knew I'd nailed it. Amanda was able to keep perfectly still during those long exposures while I did some light painting using just a headlamp. After a bit of experimentation with different light positions, I was delighted with the results, and I knew I had this shot in the bag. It was the perfect end to the perfect day, one that we'll both cherish for the rest of our lives. So I'll give you some tech notes on this one. I'm sure there's some technical questions. For years, I've been teaching the mantra, shoot for your processing. Having an understanding of exactly how you'll process a conceptualized image means that you'll know precisely how to shoot it in the field. I filmed an entire video tutorial detailing this image's creation for our course, Milky Way Made Easy. And you can watch how I shot this image for free on my YouTube channel. The trick to processing this image in Photoshop was to overlay multiple exposures using the lighten blend mode. Using layer masks and the rudimentary luminosity mask tool color range in Photoshop makes it reasonably easy to create complex selections from each different exposure. So that is how I shot Mystic Milky Way. But if you've got any questions about that, let me know.
There are no questions yet. Sometimes it takes a bit of process.
So just on as I mentioned there, if you do want to see exactly how I put this image together, both in the field and afterwards, you can just watch that video for free on my YouTube channel. Just go back a couple of summers and you'll find it.
Okay, so the first question is, how did you backlight Amanda?
Yeah, so the way that I backlit Amanda, I had this little tripod and I put this little LED light just in front of her. And it kind of worked, but I think for the final exposure, I think I actually just used my headlamp and just kind of got in front of her so that you couldn't see me. I believe that's how I did it. And you just have to get out of the way. And also, if you stand further back, obviously you become smaller, and so you don't get seen. So you just have to keep out of the way. But yeah, it was just one light. And I think the exposure. Let's have a look at this. I had 30-second exposures, but I think that the exposures with Amanda were much quicker, more like 6 or 8 seconds, if memory serves me right. So she doesn't have to keep still for a whole 30 seconds. And so you just light paint, all around her from top to bottom during that 6 or 8 second exposure. And it's actually, it's bright enough because you almost want her to be in a silhouette so that it's just the edge, just that rim light, they call it.
How do you research locations and then visualize your composition?
I'm going to give you a boring answer and say I don't research really that much. I just go out and shoot. And when you're there and you're looking at compositions and you're trying to find interesting subjects, in the back of your mind, you're looking at the direction that you're facing. So with this one, it's like, okay, looking at where I am, and I wasn't there specifically to scout out that location for a Milky Way shot. Like I say in the story, I got there and thought, this is probably facing the right direction. I bet the Milky Way passes through this. So I know that a lot of people love to do research and they love apps. I don't do any of that. I just go out. I just go and explore. I go on an adventure. And then if I think something might line up for this kind of shot, if I feel like it's facing in the right direction, then I just mentally log it, and then I can always come back to it. And the beauty of this type of shot really is I could probably have got that shot from between late July to September. It would have been a slightly different composition each time. But, it's a large enough cave mouth that you've got 2 or 3 months to have a go at this and try and figure out the exact angles. Yes, you can get apps that, you can be there and have augmented reality and just perfectly figure it all out. But there's nothing more fun than just going out and adventuring. And rather than researching, just go and see for yourself and see if you can get some ideas. Because more often than not, you'll get something. Even if it's not what you were hoping for, you'll usually get something. So that's my advice. Just go and adventure. Spend less time with apps and more time hiking the trail.
I think you've answered this by mentioning your headlight, but what are you using for your light painting tools?
Yeah, just a headlamp. These days, my headlamp just died. So I just had to buy a new one. So there's nothing special about these headlamps. They're just standard, blue light headlamps. Or it looks pretty much white. But when you shoot in with incandescent or fluorescent mode on the white balance, they do come out looking kind of blue. So pretty much any headlamp that's got a fairly clear white or bluish light. So some have a certain green tint to it that I don't like, but pretty much any old headlamp will do. You want, I would say, at least 300 lumens. I think the new one I got now it might even be 750. And but if you've got one that you can dial things down, so you can go really bright, but also dial things back a little bit, because sometimes you want a softer light painting source. You want something that's a little bit weaker, because one of the things I like to do with my astrophotography is sometimes I'll shoot like a 4-minute exposure. And so if you're doing a 4-minute exposure, if you've got a really bright headlamp, that's going to be too much. It's going to just blow out all of your highlights. So you actually want something that you can just really dial it back to almost nothing, like it's just barely there. And so those are quite useful. So just make sure it's got at least 300 lumens, but make sure it's adjustable from its brightest setting.
Okay, that's it for now.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next image.
Gabriel says quite spectacular.
Oh, thank you, Gabriel. Right, this one is called Lightning Rods. And this was shot in Smith Rock in Oregon. Well, let me give you the story for this one. A most electrifying evening was enjoyed by myself and Michael Shaneblum during this August moonset at Smith Rock in Oregon. After a spectacular sunset, we hunkered down under the stars to await the appearance of the Milky Way. We had to wait for the moon to set over the horizon before we had any chance of it being dark enough for astrophotography. Neither one of us was expecting the wait to be the highlight of the evening. As we sat there under the moonlight, staring off into the distance, scoffing copious quantities of chocolate, we both noticed a dramatic flash way off in the far horizon. There isn't much in this life that makes me put down a half-devoured bar of chocolate. Lightning is one of those things. We both sprang into action and began frantically setting up our compositions. As the lightning was so unpredictable, I had no idea how long it would last. I didn't dare stop shooting. The ideal would have been to switch my camera into interval mode, shooting more of a time lapse, but I knew that it would take at least a couple of minutes to set that up. And that's 2 minutes I didn't want to risk losing the perfect moment. For the next hour, we both stood transfixed, never taking our fingers off the shutter as we rattled off continuous 30-second exposures. This final image accurately conveys how exhilarating it felt that night to be standing atop such a magnificent ridge during that thrilling experience. At about 2 a.m., we hiked back down the hill and went our separate ways. Michael had to head back home to San Francisco, and I had to tackle the long drive back home to Canada. We both had a considerable distance to cover, but I can promise you that we ate those miles with huge grins on our tired and crumpled faces. Faces like petrified sock puppets. That's end of story. So I'll give you some tech notes on this one. This final image contains a few different exposures that I blended together to show the more exciting moments of the lightning, the cloud positions, and a gorgeous setting moon. It was an absolute nightmare to edit, with various patches required from earlier exposures because I totally forgot to use the finger filter to prevent lens flare from that super bright moon. So have we got any questions on lightning rods?
No questions yet.
This is a pretty easy crowd. Usually I'm bombarded with technical questions. Obviously, I must have answered all of those technical questions in that story. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. Oh, this has got to be one of my favorites. Incoming. So let me just go to this page. This is 38. So I'm going to skip quite a bit ahead. Definitely one of my favorite images. I was thinking of using this one as the cover image on the book, but I needed a square for it all to work out. So this one didn't make the cover. Okay. So this image is called Incoming, and it was shot at Cape Disappointment in Washington. Let me just put that down there. There we go. One of my favorite shoots of all time was the day that F4 visited Cape Disappointment. If you don't know who F4 is, it's kind of like this group of photographers that I get together with: Thomas Heaton, Adam Gibbs, and Nick Page. And the four of us occasionally go on ridiculous capers and stupidly call ourselves F4. But when F4 visited Cape Disappointment during a king tide storm, the waves were gigantic, and when the sun opened up for a brief visit, they really came to life. As busy as it was, it reminded me of a New Year's Day fireworks display that I once witnessed in Perth, Australia. Cries of "woo" and "ah" could be heard pretty regularly. I may have even indulged in a very few un-English whoops myself, you know. With this shoot, I'd found my rhythm. After about 2 hours of shooting waves, I'd become quite good at predicting the penultimate moment of these roiling behemoths. I saw this titan sweeping in and tracked it with my 100 to 400 millimeter telephoto lens using continuous autofocus. With my camera set to shoot high-speed continuous burst, I was able to capture the moment of ultimate grandeur just as the wave reached its peak before collapsing explosively. As with most of these wave images, the birds add so much action and character. I wish I could buy them a clam or two just to say thanks. It was one of those mornings when you've witnessed something really special and you know it. I count myself very lucky to have seen this, and even more fortunate to have documented such an adventure with the F4 road trip. On this day, I learned that Thomas Heaton is a bit of a chicken. We'd planned to shoot a scene in the murder box, which is the trailer that we nicknamed the murder box, where Nick Page would review our wave images from the backs of our cameras. As a juvenile prank, Tom and I decided to drop in a surprise image of our bare bums so that when we filmed Nick's reaction, he'd lose his composure. The prank went very well, and to our surprise, Nick managed to hold it together while reviewing our pale buttocks. Although I can't shake the suspicion that his gaze lingered upon Tom's pasty white orbs longer than on my withered and time-bleached dough piles. Imagine my disappointment when reviewing the finished episode of this gloriously comedic scene, only to discover all trace of Tom's naked cheeks deleted. All that was left for the unfortunate viewers to enjoy were my jowly haunches. Shame on you, Tom. Shame on you. And that's the end of that story. I'll give you some tech notes. I was worried about blowing out the highlights in this wave's crest, so I grossly underexposed the shot. Even at f11, the focus falls off slightly in the background because I chose to lock focus on the wave rather than the rocks. It was actually quite stressful because even taking 2 minutes to change memory cards and batteries could mean missing the perfect wave. Any questions on incoming or whatever?
I'm going to start with a question on the last image. Can you explain the finger filter?
Yeah, so the finger filter, that's just what I call it, but I'm sure other people call it whatever they want. It's basically where if you're shooting directly into the sun or directly into the moon or any other very bright light source, you're going to get lens flare. So what I do is I'll typically take a shot where I accept the lens flare. So there's always this lens flare in my image. I'll take that shot, and then I'll take another shot where I get my hand, and with my fingers, I just place my fingers over that light source, whether it's the moon or the sun or a very, very bright light. And by blocking out that light source, the rest of your frame will not have the ugly lens flare. In some cases it's nice, but often it's quite ugly. So what you'll end up with there is two images. You'll have one that has no lens flare, but it's got your hand in it. And then you'll have another image which has lots of lens flare, but no hand. And so your trick then is to blend those two together, which is quite easy. You just mask it in Photoshop so that you've got this more natural looking image that isn't full of ugly lens flare, but also doesn't have a hand in it. You could use anything really. You could use a wallet or you could a piece of card, anything, but usually you've always got your hands. So I just drop it down. I just call it the finger filter.
Okay, and now we have comments about incoming, absolutely beautiful, stunning shot. And then how close were you standing?
Oh, I'm quite a long way from that. That was actually shot in, I think I'm at about 300 millimeter, and I might have actually even set the camera in crop mode. So I'm quite a long way from that. I'm completely safe. I'm not really in much danger. Although there was one wave that kind of got a little bit sketchy, but we were safe. Nobody got hurt. So yeah, that was the 100 to 400. And if I look at the book, oh, here you go. It says in the book, 352 millimeter. But I suspect I was in crop mode, so that would probably take it closer to, my math is terrible, but I'm going to guess 500 millimeters probably what that would actually be.
Okay, this question wasn't worried about your safety, but was wondering about your gear. How do you protect your gear from sea spray?
Again, we were so far away that we weren't getting any sea spray at all. But I mean, there are lots of images that I've shot where they're wide angle shots and you're right close up to the waves. And really, you either risk it or you don't. There's no way to protect your gear unless you're prepared to completely cover it with what I call camera condoms, which is just those plastic sheets. And even then, you know, you're going to have, it's so difficult to shoot with those. I guess I would use those if I knew for sure that my camera was going to get sea spray, because it will just destroy your camera eventually. But most of the time, in fact, hardly ever will I use those. I just take the risk, you know, because I don't expect to get that close to a wave and just get completely sprayed. If I did, I would put those plastic films on. That's really all you can do.
Okay, do you use dodge and burn much when you're post-processing?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. I mean, constantly. That's all I do. You know, I don't really burn much, but I dodge. So I accentuate highlights in my images. And I call it selective contrast. So what I'll do is I'll use an adjustment layer in Photoshop, and I'll create this contrast layer with curves. So you basically, let's just say you add this curves adjustment layer and you just push the highlights to be a little bit brighter. And then I will use a white brush to just brush parts of the image in to make that a little bit brighter, to pick out highlights that already exist and just accentuate them. And I'll typically start off quite exaggerated. I'll really make it quite over the top. And then once you've brushed in the areas that you want to dodge, then I'll turn down the opacity of that adjustment layer so that it's like 10% or 20%. It's just barely there. And it looks a little bit more natural. And my philosophy is to just kind of make it so that if you switch it off, you'd miss it. But when you switch it back on, you can't necessarily tell where the effect is. That's just my philosophy with dodging.
Excuse me. I'm wondering if you got down a little bit lower from wherever you were shooting. I know it was up far away, but did you get down lower to get that particular composition?
No, I'm probably standing on a log there to get me a little bit higher to get that particular composition. And it's so tricky. And that's why when you're shooting these, you almost kind of want to shoot a little bit too wide. For that shot, I felt I was in a little bit too tight. One of the things I often talk about in when I'm teaching and also in my online photography courses is the notion of what I call buffer zones. And that's kind of like the very limits on the edge of your frame where you'd like anything of importance to go into. So if you look here, hopefully you can see my mouse, you can see the very top of the wave there. any closer to the edge, and that composition would just fail completely. It's just, to me, it's as close to being unacceptable as I could possibly allow it. I would have preferred, if I'd have done that perfect, I would have just zoomed out a little bit and just had a little bit more space. And then I could have maybe cropped it a little bit better, but it's right on the edge of what I found acceptable, but I still love it. Even with that, imperfection, I still love it just because of the moment and the action.
Okay. Do you ever shoot time exposures without a tripod or something to balance on?
What do you mean by time exposures? Do you mean like a quarter of a second or a 1 second?
I'm assuming they're meaning longer time.
Yeah, long exposures. Yeah, I mean, often if I'm really low to the ground, I'm literally on the ground, then you've got to get rid of the tripod, and I'll just place the camera on the floor, and I might wedge it with rocks or whatever. I know you can buy that thing called a platypod. It's just more gear that I don't want to carry, even though it's probably fairly light and small. If you look at my camera bag, it's ridiculous how little gear I use. Like if you meet Michael Shainbloom, he's got 2 camera bags and all the gear. If you meet Adam Gibbs, he's got 1 camera bag, but it's the biggest camera bag and it's got all the gear. And I don't know how these guys can tolerate it. If you look at my camera bag, it's sparse. There's hardly anything in there. And I'm a vlogger, I have to carry a second camera so I can film myself, right? So I really do want to try and keep things to a minimum. So yeah, to answer the question, yes, I will sometimes, if I can, I'll just put my camera right on the deck. And if it needs to be wedged to get it level or get the tilt just right, then I'll see what I can find, some twigs or some rocks. Usually you can get what you need.
You opened yourself up to this question. Tracy asks, so what is in your bag?
I should do one of those. Actually, it's mostly chocolate. To be honest, I mean, let's get priorities in order. It's mostly chocolate, snacks, but I'll do one of those. If I really am desperate for content, I'll do a what's in my bag video. But I basically have my main camera, which is the A7R4, and I'll carry at the most 3 lenses. And if I can get away with just 2, then I'll do that. So I'll try and have super wide, medium focal length, and then a super telephoto. But if I know where I'm going, like if I have for example, what that mystic Milky Way image, if I know that I'm going to do an astrophotography shot, there's no way I'm taking a kilogram telephoto lens if I know specifically what I'm going for. And, you could argue, yeah, but that's stupid because what if you saw a whale and you needed to get a telephoto shot? Yes, I would have missed an opportunity, but I'm carrying 2 tripods most of the time. It's all about minimal gear. And one thing I do like about having minimal gear is I feel it does tend to focus you a little bit more on what it is that you're trying to achieve. It kind of simplifies and pares things down so that your experience is a little bit more focused and pure. That's just my philosophy, right or wrong.
That's the last question on this image.
Okay, so
a lot of people liked it, just so you know.
Yeah, oh, thanks, guys. I'm glad you like it. It's definitely one of my favorites. So this whole extravaganza, this dazzling experience that I'm providing to you right now, it's about, we've said it would be an hour and a half. So are you guys okay if I just do one more and we go over time slightly?
Your audience has dropped about 10 over the time frame, so some people have chosen to leave, but clearly you're still up there with audience, so I'd do it.
Oh, well, that just depressed me. You just told me people have left my show. Oh, man, you shouldn't have said that. God.
Remember, a lot of us are old.
It's past your bedtime. Yeah, all right, fair enough. All right, we'll do one more, and then we'll do some questions, and then we'll wrap it up because I am quite hungry. I've not had dinner yet, so we'll do the last one. So this one is called Claret Thieves. What page is this? This is page 30. Yes, but this is one of my favorites, I have to admit. Okay, so Claret Thieves. This is the Icefield Parkway in Alberta. If there was ever a scene too big to fit into any camera frame, it's this overlook in Alberta. I had to shoot a 5-shot vertical panorama to stitch together this composition. This allowed me to capture not only the composition that I saw with my own eyes, but had the added bonus of making the peaks appear taller than they really are. If you've seen my videos, you'll know that I really enjoy maximizing the lens distortion of super wide angle lenses. And this is a perfect example of how I took advantage of that, placing the tops of the mountains right in the sweet spot at the edge of the lens elongated them in a very pleasing way. Now, I know that I bleat on about mosquitoes a lot in my vlogs, but this morning was pretty much a breaking point for me. Not only was I covered in stolen blood from swatting the winged leeches, but I'd even inhaled a couple that flew too close to my gaping maw. Attempting to film and teach an in-depth tutorial while being relentlessly harassed required every ounce of patience I could muster. I donated so much blood to those evil freeloaders that I should receive some kind of award, or at least free cookies like you get at the donor bank. That day, I resolved to only ever visit the Rockies during colder seasons. It gets so cold that the mosquitoes would freeze and shatter if they tried to take flight in those winter months. Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful sight to see? Is that cruel of me? I don't think it is. To this day, I continue to deny free meals to those erratically flying claret scroungers. I'm pretty sure they're all drunk drivers anyway. Aside from the unusual color of this morning, what makes this image interesting to me is that thin layer of mist that you can see in the mountain's base. The night before, we'd enjoyed a significant storm with torrential rain, so I knew there'd be a good chance of mist as the temperature warmed up during the sunrise. When I study such a vast mountainscape, my imagination runs wild, and I can become lost thinking of epic battles between grizzly bears and wolves, mountain lions and wolverines, and perhaps the odd hapless heliskier who made a wrong turn into a dangerous realm. I confess, I do read too many fantasy books. End of story. So let me give you some tech notes on this one. A panorama like this is pretty challenging. So I shot 5 vertical frames with each frame bracketed and focus stacked. I prefer to blend and stack each frame before stitching them together in Photoshop. It's the most laborious method, but gives the cleanest result. Once stitched, I then perform color and contrast adjustments as the final phase in the editing process. So that is the final image. Have you got any questions either related to that image or whatever you want to ask?
I have comments. One person said you've lost audience because it's Monday Night Football. Love this spot, always stopping our way to Jasper, great capture. I saw what could have been the world's largest raven here. Maybe it was a mosquito. And great photo, and one I've tried to duplicate. So
yeah, just keep going back, and you will get. And that even wasn't the best light ever. You know, I could have had better light there, but if you can ever go back there and get that perfect morning light, oh man, what a shot you would get, because it is just such a huge and spectacular vista.
We have goat lick here as a question. So I think they're questioning whether or not it's a favorite spot where goats will be.
Well, it's called Goats and Glaciers. That's what it's called. So yeah, you will see goats in that area. I didn't see any on that day. Wouldn't it be good if there was one just in the foreground there? But no, there wasn't.
Do you ever use any third-party plugins to help with post-processing, or
No.
Lightroom and Photoshop?
Actually, that's not true. I was going to say no. The only extra software that I use is if I'm doing a Star Trails, I'll do Star Stacks, which isn't a plugin, but Star Stacks is a third-party application. And then the only other thing that I ever use, and this is only occasionally, is Topaz Denoise, because I think it does a bit of a better job denoising your high ISO images. than Photoshop does. But often what I'll do is I'll just edit the image in Photoshop, finish it. And then if it still looks a little bit noisy, then I'll take it into Topaz Denoise and I'll just really improve that image quality, especially for my prints. If I'm doing any prints, I really don't want any noise in there. And I found that Topaz just takes things to that next level of clean, but also keeps your details. But other than that, I don't use any third-party plugins. To me, Photoshop does almost everything I need it to do.
Okay, that's it in terms of comments and questions. I don't know if Mark or Judy want to make any closing comments. Oh, I have one. How long on average do you spend on editing?
On average, it's a tricky one because there isn't really an average. Every single image requires something different. So for example, this image, at least an hour, because it's focus stacked, 5 focus stacked frames, 5 bracketed frames, and then you stitch them together. And also the size of it, it's a slow process. The computer struggles to deal with such a big file. So that takes a long time, but there are other images. Sometimes a lot of those wave images that you've seen, like that incoming, that didn't take long at all. You know, it was pretty quick to edit. So some can be done in 5 minutes. Some take hours. And there are some that are such problems. I'll do an edit and I'm not happy with it. And I'll just save the file and sit on it. And I might come back to it a week later and try again or make a few tweaks. So I know it's not really a concise answer, but that's the truth, is that they're all different. They all require a different process.
A lot of people thanking you and saying they enjoyed the images.
Right. Well, I guess that wraps things up. Thank you guys for inviting me along to do this presentation for you. I managed to lose only 10 people, so you know that's pretty encouraging. And if anybody wants, I mean, definitely this wasn't all about trying to promote my book, but if anybody wants to purchase a copy of Chasing Awe with Gavin Hardcastle, just go to fototripper.com. That's FOTO. And you'll be able to order your copy. And it might just arrive. In fact, we're all in Canada. So I think we're all in Canada. So it will arrive before Christmas if you wanted to do that. But yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I hope you learned something, or you got inspired, or you got a chuckle out of the stories. And hopefully I'll see some comments, some new followers on YouTube. If you want to see my adventures and see what we get up to, just look up Photo Tripper on YouTube. I've got a really funny one coming out this weekend.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gavin. Great presentation, and the book is fantastic. And this was just a sampling of some of the images tonight, but I just struggled to put the book down. To be honest, it's great. And for our Central Alberta members, if you check out Gavin's latest video on YouTube, Abraham Lake, which is a favorite of our club to get out that way. So a little plug for Gavin's YouTube channel there as well.
Oh, thanks for that. Actually, I will say this before I go. Keep watching the videos, because I don't think it's going to be the next one, but maybe 2 after that. I go back to Abraham Lake and I get the best shot possibly of my entire career. I think it is my best image of all time on that trip. And you're going to see the video coming in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. So hopefully you don't miss that one.
I've got one more question for you though, Gavin. You spend a lot of time in Western Canada, of course, in BC, and you cross the mountains to our side, but do you go much further east, or do you stick to the mountains? Do you ever go Drumheller or anywhere in the prairies, or do you just stop and go back?
Well, no, it's funny you should say that, because my next video is Drumheller.
Oh,
yeah. And then the one after that is going to be, what's that one just around the corner from there? Dinosaur.
The provincial park?
Yeah, Dinosaur Provincial Park. And also Writing on Stone. So yeah, I've done a few of those sort of eastern shots, but this summer we were actually trying to get to the East Coast, to the Maritimes, the plan was when we went on this trip that you just seen these recent videos from, the plan was to continue on all the way to the Maritimes, but during the time that we were there, they closed it down. And so it was, okay, I guess we're not going to do that. So hopefully next year we could do that, you know, but for now, that's as far east as I've got. I do keep trying, but I keep getting turned around. So we'll try.
I have just a pragmatic question. How does Clayton Reitzel collect his book?
Just get in touch via, I guess from Mark, email. If you can just email me directly through fototripper.com, just go to my contact page and just email me and just say, this is my name. I won this book fair and square, and just give me your address, and I'll send you a copy of the book. I'll even sign it for you.
Okay. And again, the name was Clayton Reitzel. You can see it, maybe see it on your, if you stop sharing your screen, you'll see it in the gallery probably.
Right. Well, I mean, I trust that.
Here I am. Thanks, Gavin. Appreciate it. And I will send you my name and address.
Okay, Clayton. Yeah, no problem. I'm pretty sure there won't be any other Claytons emailing me saying I won a book.
You never know.
You never know.
All righty. Thanks.
Okay, we'll get you the video, Gavin. I'll get it to Mark as well, and the chat. So you see some of the comments that we haven't covered here.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be fun. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me on, guys. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And yeah, get in touch via the YouTubes, and I'll see you on those videos.
Okay. Thanks, Gavin.
And
Okay. Good night.
Cap.
Okay.
Thanks for Caps for putting this Alberta Camera Club Alliance event on. Thank you.
All right. Good night, guys. Sleep well.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.